Let's talk about now the philosophy of competing biblically as a long-range target. We've used the terminology in discipleship that we want people to walk with God for a lifetime, finish strong, reproduce, and multiply. So that'd be a long-range target. A short target, a target that puts itself at risk, would be just being born again. If somebody's born again and they don't, now we're down to the parable of the seeds. If they're born again and get snatched by Satan that night, that's not good. If they don't go roots into the ground and they fall away, that's not good. If they get choked by the cares and worries of this world, that's not good. And so we're thinking always about the long view of things. We even talked about that when we discussed eternity, how the fourth knuckle is about life as mission. It's eternity. It's a long view of things. You know, we say this, and when we work in college circles, it takes 50 years to make a man or a woman of God. Why do we say 50 years? Well, it's not a magic number. It's just to show length. It's to show kind of a longitudinal view. It's the fact that when somebody's in college, hypothetically, they're in their 20s, and if they pass away somewhere in their 70s, which would be the length of a normal American male and female age, somewhere in the mid to late 70s, that's 50 years. And so we're basically saying to people that this is a lifetime. You walk with God for a lifetime. The goal is to keep walking with Him for a lifetime, not just to walk with a lifetime, but to finish strong. Not just to finish strong at the second knuckle, but to impact others, to reproduce in such a way that it multiplies and becomes multi-generational. This is also how we think about sport philosophy. So when we talk about what's a long view of things or what's long-range goals or targets, we're talking about evangelism, about he who wins souls is wise. We're talking about evangelizing the world. Long view of thing is not looking at our city or our team or our league or our state. A long view of thing is the world. It's the nations. It's about the nations. His heart is for the world. His heart is for Tacoma also, and New York City and Rio de Janeiro. His heart is for the city, but it's also for the world. And we have to make sure that we have a long view of things in terms of geography. We have to have a long view of things in terms of time. This is a lifestyle. This is a sports style. This is something that for me personally, it's been a 40-year adventure. And as long as I keep living, it's going to continue to be. And with those that we're seeking and praying to impact, the hope is they be grabbed when they're younger rather than older, and that they walk in this philosophy of competition and life, which is applicable to business and family and all aspects of life. Our goal is that this be a lifestyle from the beginning to the end. And evangelism and winning souls is a lifetime venture. It's something once you're born again that is part of the commandment of God to win souls. And then second, of course, is discipleship. The scriptures say, go make disciples. You can see discipleship as general growth. We address that in the classes at the Robert Coleman School of Discipleship. Discipleship is both generalized growth, moving the ball forward, but we like to think of it in terms of something much more and different than that. We like to think of it in terms of making disciples who make disciples, and there's a continuity. There's for a lifetime, they're disciple makers, and their fruit then continue themselves to make disciples. That's how we look at sport. We're looking at, in a long view of things, that we're going to use sport to disciple. We use sport to evangelize until we pass away. We use sport to disciple until we're no longer on this planet. We're discipling our teammates. We're discipling those that are younger. We're discipling those that are older. We're discipling those in the sport context. We learn it there potentially, and we work outside of the sport context. We have a long view of things. It has to do with vertical discipleship, where we are the disciples of Jesus, and it's about horizontal discipleship. We're making disciples of other men and women. And so discipleship is part of our long view and thing, in our long-range target, to use the sport to evangelize, to use the sport to disciple. It's an intentional plan. That means we do it on purpose. It's a strategic growth mechanism. That means we have a plan. We have a plan to evangelize through sport. We have a plan to disciple through sports. We have a plan to reproduce and continue reproducing so that a long view of things, that multiplication occurs. This is a long view of things. If you look at reproduction, even in a math table that we use as an example of the difference between addition and discipleship and multiplication, we have a long view of things. We see it over a 30-year sequence or a generation so that we don't get hung up with slow growth and low growth in the early stages. But we understand that when multiplication kicks in, when you go from 10 to the first power, to 10 to the second, to 10 to the third, to 10 to the fourth, those numbers get exponentially and supernaturally bigger. And we're thinking about the long view of things, which is why God, who when Jesus died on the cross and chose the 12, he was thinking about 2,000 years from now in our day, that if he's going to reach long over 2 centuries through those 12, he needs to disciple them in a certain way so that they reproduce, reproducers, which translates into multiplication that then can last 2,000 years and beyond. If he doesn't return, the reproduction, multiplication, discipleship principles of what Jesus did with the 12, as articulated in the benchmark book on it by Dr. Robert Coleman, The Master Plan of Evangelism, that those concepts and principles of reproduction and multiplication is also how this philosophy is reproduced and passed on. It's the ripple effect of this philosophy that long-term our prayer is that it reach the nations. It reach the nations, that's geography, forever, that's the time, that's a linear timeline. This is how we think about that. That's how we think about discipleship. That's how we think about communicating and reproducing this philosophy. That's how we think about intercession. We talked about that previously. In the same way that you reproduce disciples, you also reproduce people who pray, who learn the act of intercession, of standing between God and man and bringing things down from heaven to earth, right? That's our prayer. And that's what we're asking for, is the kingdom of God advance and the promises of God come down from heaven and practically come to the earth, that the philosophy of competing biblically multiplies not just into the sporting event, but to the fans and to the interrelationships and to observers and spectators that affects the generation. I know for a fact, because it's true in my own story, let alone others, that when I was transformed in this philosophy to deepen and widen my walk with God, everybody since those days that it was presented to me and germinated in my soul and it became me, that everybody I've touched since that point, which is 45 years, has been touched at some level because of the philosophy of competing biblically that reproduced and reproduced and reproduced with anybody and everybody that I had a plan, an intentional strategic plan to touch through an oral articulation and through a lifestyle. They all were impacted by this. It's local, it's national, it's world impact. When we're coaching youth sports, we are doing it in such a way that our target is that these kids come to Jesus, walk with Jesus for a lifetime, finish strong, reproduce, and multiply to the ends of the earth for as long as they live. This is how we think about it. It's not just let's go play soccer with little 6-year-olds. It's let's pray for them, let's love them, let's care for them, let's give them some tips on how to play more effectively so they can feel the pleasure of enjoying the sport, so that the world will be one. This is what we're thinking, because we're thinking as fourth knuckle people. It's life as mission. This mission field is sports. It's whatever sport we're playing, coaching, observing, parenting, friends of. It's an all-encompassing philosophy. It impacts the inner circle, the players and the coaches, and the outer circle, the family, the friends, the fans, which equals spectators. This is how we view it. Again, it's a lifestyle. It's the Great Commission lifestyle through sport.